say. We've got Stephen Larkham, part of the Australian backroom team, with us this morning. Stephen, good morning to you. How you doing?
Afternoon, evening for us, yeah.
Yeah. Listen, thanks a million for doing this for us. It's a pretty interesting time at the moment. It's been a brilliant test series so far. You guys obviously clearly the dominant team in the first game. Ireland maybe a little bit cuter than we were in the first test and the second test, so it's perfectly balanced.
It is, yeah, and it's a sold-out test this weekend, so it's going to be a good atmosphere. And I think we had a bit of a slip-up on the weekend. We obviously played okay for our first test and had a 6-day turnaround from Super Rugby into the first test, and pretty impressed with the way the boys played that game. I think we let ourselves down on the weekend, and I know Ireland obviously played a lot better, so I think both teams will be right to go this weekend.
Been a bit of mild controversy in the way that Ireland dealt with Israel Folau over the last week or so. Some of the analysis would suggest that what Ireland were doing was putting bodies in front of where the ball was going to land, and we think that's kind of cute and intelligent and how you play the game, and I guess maybe you guys are wondering if it's exactly legal. That's kind of how international rugby works these days.
Definitely questions to the referee about blocking lines, but every team in World Rugby does it. Every team in top-level rugby does it. I think probably what we noticed on the weekend is that they had a couple of guys in front of Israel, and in our eyes it was pretty obvious. But we've sought clarity from the referees, and I'm sure that they'll be looking out for that this weekend.
Yeah, this is one of the things I think that a lot of people don't really fully appreciate, that the discourse with referees, it's ongoing, and it's fairly common to sit down in the build-up to a game and say, well, this is exactly what we're going to try and do. So Mark Robson said that he had a cup of coffee with the referee ahead of the first test, and the referee had explained what you guys had told him about what your intention was in terms of your defence and being really quick off the line, trying to hit the line actually at pace and sprinting. And I wonder, did you guys know that he was going to talk to the media about that? Is that fair game, that whatever you're talking about should be out there and it should be quite transparent?
Yes, I believe that's the way it's meant to be. So anytime we have a meeting with the referee, the opposition team are invited to that meeting as well. So it's all meant to be transparent. It's not so much about trying to get one up on the other team. It's just making sure that the referee is seeing the game the same way that we see the game. And we obviously need to adapt to the way the referee refs early in the game, but it's good to know what he's thinking before he gets into the game.
One of the things as well that we've been interested in over the course of this test series is just the relative health of the game in Australia at the moment. And, we look at the quality of play, and particularly in that first test, as you said, with just a 6-day turnaround, and the beautiful football that all of the individual players and the skill set that they have seem capable of living on the field. And yet at the same time, we're reading in the background some of these stories about the game not being as popular as it once was. What is the truth about where rugby is in Australia, and how difficult is that battle just to win hearts and minds at the moment?
Very difficult, yeah, very difficult. I think a lot of it stems from Super Rugby, so particularly the Trans-Tasman rivalry. So, we've got big competition with New Zealand, obviously with the Bledisloe Cup at the national level, but throughout Super Rugby as well, there's the 3 traditional countries that sort of have played that. We've now got Argentina and Japan, but the big rivalry really for Australian teams is New Zealand, and we haven't been faring well against them over the last couple of years, and even before that it was a fairly scattered record. So it's really difficult to sort of promote rugby when teams are losing every weekend up until the start of the test season, and I think there's really good support for the national side in Australia. What we're seeing is that next level down is struggling to find support. So we're certainly in the process at the moment of trying to fix that competition, both in terms of the skill level and depth of player talent within Australia, but also the format of the competition to see whether more people will be interested in it.
What is the expectancy of the rugby union sporting public in Australia at the moment? Is it to win a World Cup next year?
It's hard to say. I certainly haven't spoken to people about the World Cup, and even as a team, I mean, that's a long-term goal. I know there's a lot of talk in Europe about the World Cup, and teams are sort of, particularly Ireland, are using this tour as a bit of a build-in to the World Cup to see how our players will play away from home and significantly away from home. For us, because of the landscape of rugby in Australia, we've been very much focused just on this June series, and we haven't gone any further than that. We've got to get rugby back on the map, and we sort of do that generally by having success at the top level. So we've been really focused on that. On the back of the June series, we get into the Rugby Championship, and then on the back of that, we'll start to get real preparations for the World Cup.
You guys obviously feel quite a responsibility to be part of that rugby story then, that, you know, your job isn't just to make the team a better attacking force. I'll talk to you about that in a minute maybe, but like that actually you feel part of Australian rugby culture, you understand the heritage and you understand where it needs to get to. Like just even your ability to, or willingness to talk to us today, for example, the chances of us getting a member of the Irish backroom team to commit to a Skype from Australia are very low because they don't really feel like they need to do it. But you guys are far more open to just talking to people about what's going on.
Yeah, we're certainly trying to spread the word that rugby's in a little bit of trouble in Australia. But like I said, I think it's the next level down. So we're doing everything we can to try and help that next level down. At the top level, there is real interest in the sport. I think because it's so strong around the world and we're competing against other teams around the world, there is a real following for the Wallabies. And we've seen that through this test series. I think the first two test matches were all but sold out, and the one this weekend is sold out. That's, you know, there's a lot of Irish supporters in Australia, there's no doubt about that, but there's real interest in test matches at the moment. But we are, I mean, our role, now that we're full-time coaches, and it's the first time Australia have had 5 full-time coaches leading into a World Cup, you know, a year out from the World Cup, and we've got 5 full-time coaches on board. Our job is, yes, not only with the national team, but it's also trying to promote the game in Australia.
One of the most interesting pieces I'd seen recently was the value of the TV rights deal for the rugby league franchises was allowing them to attract the best teenagers, and that's kind of the next generation of rugby players coming through. There's no sign of it yet with the national team. Like the skill set, as I said, of your team over the last 2 tests has been absolutely phenomenal. So is that a concern into the future, that some of those best young athletes will end up playing NRL instead of rugby union?
Yeah, that's been ongoing. That's been ongoing since the rivalry between the sports, and it's no different at the moment. I think we've certainly got a bit of a focus on how we're going to try and keep some of those talented young players in the game, by maybe competing with rugby league in that market. But yeah, our focus, I think, our focus, particularly as Wallaby coaches and as a Wallaby team, is to play the best rugby we can possibly play, the most entertaining rugby that we can possibly play, so that people who see the game, even just briefly or the first time they've seen it, they're instantly attracted to the game, and we can therefore attract more people both following the game and playing the game.
I did want to talk to you a bit about that, because the team that you won the World Cup with, I was just looking back at the back line. It was such a beautifully balanced, and you know, they were capable of being really aggressive, and they were also capable of the silky skills. They had pace, they had brawn, they had brains, they had kind of everything that you would want in a rugby team. And it did strike me that, you know, you had all that skill set as well. As a coach, when you were coming out 10 years ago from playing, how easy was it for you to coach players who maybe couldn't do all the things that you could do as a player? What was that transition like for you as an individual?
I guess the transition out of being a player into the coaching environment is fairly smooth, in that you know how a team runs. But the hardest thing for me, and I think for most coaches, is trying to see it from other people's perspectives and understand that the way I probably saw the game and the way that I'd be trying to explain it, if I was playing in that position, would be different to someone else who's got different skills and sees the game differently. So that was probably the biggest transition over the first couple of years, was really understanding it from someone else's perspective, understanding their skill set. And you know, I think that those first 2 years were a real growth for me, because I think that the hardest thing in a team environment is understanding how you fit into that environment first and foremost. And then once you sort of get a handle on, you know, how you are perceived by other people and how you perceive other people, then you start to get a little bit of team cohesion.
Is there kind of a sense that you're getting in terms of how long it takes to kind of do your time, I suppose, in the backroom team with any sort of rugby setup at the moment? Because we look at the Ronan O'Gara situation at the moment, and there seems to be a general sense that his next step after his current job in New Zealand will be a head coach job somewhere in the Northern Hemisphere.
Right. There's no expectation on that from my perspective. I think I've done a bit of head coaching with the Brumbies for 4 odd years there, and certainly took a lot out of that. And I mean, my transition to head coaching was fairly quick, I'd have to say that. And I was still learning when I got the position of head coach, which I think just about every head coach has to go through at some stage. And now sort of sitting in this assistant coaching role, it's really good to sit back now and see it from the other perspective. So I've really no plans after this gig with the Wallabies, which is up until the World Cup.
You talked about having different perspectives, and I wondered how actually having played different positions so famously, so for people who are unaware, you start your international career as a fullback and then suddenly get catapulted into the 10 position about a year and a bit out from the 99 World Cup. At that point, you obviously had to think, I need to look at this a little bit differently and think about life a little bit differently and think about positions a bit differently. What was that transition like? Was that easy enough for you at the time?
It was, yeah. They gave me enough time. So it was, prior to Super Rugby in '96, which was when I first was capped for the Wallabies as well, the year before that I was playing halfback. At the end of that year, I was playing outside centre for a couple of games. I got picked for the Brumbies as an outside centre in the first game of Super Rugby. And by the end of that year, I was utility back for the Wallabies and sort of really focused on playing fullback. 2 years later, I had an opportunity to play 5'8", and it was fairly seamless because the coach at the time gave me. He was very open and upfront. He said, "Look, we've got 6 games until there's anything really serious on board, so we'll give you these 6 games to try and find your feet." My first real game was a test game at 5'8", so. It was, if I'd probably sat back and thought about it, I would have been quite nervous, but it all just rolled in. It was sort of a week before he told me, and I got into the game and he said, "Don't change anything, just play the way that you're normally playing, and we'll adapt from there." And we were lucky enough to play England in that first game. I think we smashed them 66-0 or something like that. So
it's quite a hat-trick, right?
Yeah.
It's not a bad debut as a 10. So what was the difference? It came naturally enough, but like in retrospect, and now as an attack coach, what is the difference between 10 and 15?
It's just the time that you have, really. I mean, 12 is probably harder than 10, but the amount of time you have before the opposition get to you. So as a fullback, you've got pretty much all the time in the world, unless it's a contestable kick, but you sort of throw yourself into that. If it's a long kick, you've got plenty of time to size up the opposition. As a 5'8", you've kind of got to make your decision before you get the ball because the defence is right on top of you. So, I think it's your preparation before you get the ball is the most important thing. And then, I really struggled. I played 12 for a couple of test matches as well, and I think that was the most difficult position for me to play because I'm not the biggest sort of a guy, and when the pressure's coming on you with 2 passes, you've got to be a little bit more physically built to withstand the contest that's about to happen.
Yeah, because there's been a debate around this with regards to Joey Carberry up here at the moment, and I know you've obviously been focused on your own team, particularly around the first test when Carberry started for Ireland, but I'm not sure what your take is on that situation with regards to him having a little bit more time, obviously, at 15 and showing his on-the-ball skills rather than him kind of playmaking from 10. It is a debate that's still up in the air. It seems to have come to a conclusion where 10 is going to be where his future is at, but at the same time, I'd be interested to hear your take on that, whether or not he can still have a future at 15.
I guess, for me it was, just talking about my personal experience, it was an opportunity that was created because players were retiring. When I first played my first test at 5'8", it was because there was no one really in Australia who had that experience, and they gave me the opportunity. So I guess that's what you're talking about in terms of Rob potentially retiring soon. I assume that's what you're getting at, and potentially Joey moving to that position. I think he's very skillful. There's no doubt about that, and I see that he has the skills for both positions. I like what he does in attack at 5'8". I think he hasn't had a lot of time there. I know that he plays a slightly different game to Johnny, but I think he's equally as dangerous, probably more dangerous with ball in hand. as a running threat. But I think he sees the game really well, and I think he's got enough speed as well to play in that fullback position.
Your official title, I think, is attack coach, but it seems to me that the titles around rugby coaching were designed in the late 90s and kind of aren't really fit for purpose anymore. That if you're a coach who is focused on attack, then ultimately you have to understand defence, because so many attacking opportunities come from turnovers and quick ball off turnovers and knowing exactly what to do when the game becomes unstructured. Sure, you can have set plays off restarts and line-outs, and your maul needs to work and all that kind of stuff, but I guess to be a proper attack coach, you really have to spend a lot of time looking at defence and how teams are setting up. So you kind of have to be as interested in defence as attack if you are nominally an attack coach.
Yeah, that's one of the situations that we have here in Australia with Super Rugby, we've got Daryl Gibson is the Waratahs coach, and for the last couple of years, he's taken over as head coach recently, and for the last couple of years, he was the attack coach, and he switched roles, and he found it really easy to jump into the role of defence coach because, that's basically my job. I'm looking at defences the whole time and trying to work out where the weaknesses are, and from that, I guess you identify what are good, strong defensive systems and which teams have them. So, I'm pretty well versed in looking at all that. And when I was head coach, I had a real priority on defence. So that's certainly a passion of mine. But at the moment, there are so many intricacies to attack. It's defence is kind of black and white to me. I think that it's a really logical part of the game, whereas attack is very difficult. It's very chaotic. You've got a lot of personalities, a lot of different skill sets, and a lot of different situations that are thrust in front of you. So, I'm enjoying the challenge of really trying to knuckle down and understand every different aspect of attack from obviously not my perspective.
Yeah, and that's interesting too, because like I would have said that's how you played the game. That your description there of a bit chaotic, lots of different personalities. Like you could be a sit back and kick the ball. You could also take the ball to the line. You could have a jink. There could be a very late delayed pass. That could be a short pass. That could be an offload. And knowing how to try and fit those players and that skill set into the modern game is what's going to take the game to the next level and make it, again, one of those spectacles that people want to watch, right?
Yeah, it's a real challenge, I think, because when we were playing, I don't think the defences were as good as they are today. I don't think the athletes were as good as they are today. So there were a lot more opportunities from tiring bodies, from athletes who weren't as agile. And we were pretty good at, as a team, we were pretty good at identifying those weaknesses and exploiting those weaknesses. I just don't think those weaknesses are there anymore in defence. Guys are fitter. You get your subs on, and those guys obviously had an impact off the bench. So, the challenge really is, and the way that we play, and I know it's the way that Ireland play as well, and most teams playing internationally around the world play with some sort of system in their attack. And we're quite structured, but within that structure, very similar to Ireland, within that structure, the guys have got one or two options. And within those one or two options, we really give the players the freedom to try and play what's in front of them. And I think that's the key, and that's what we always used to do before there was any structure in our game. Really, it was kind of play what's in front of us. We're just trying to offer those solutions to players now in smaller spaces.
Cheika wrote this really interesting piece before the first test in the first person narrative on one of those websites. I can't remember. It's not the Players Chronicle, it's the Australian version of it, although there's a big disclaimer that they're not connected with it at the bottom of the piece, where he talked about he needs to embrace science and is constantly striving to learn as much as he possibly can. And it was just interesting because obviously we follow Cheika really closely since his time at Leinster and would have kind of heard that from the players, that he wasn't just the caricature of the loud, angry Australian coming down and shit kicking, basically, that there was also this other very curious and interested element in his makeup. And I just wonder what that's like to work with, and how that relationship came about, and how that kind of call, when that comes, are you straight away, yeah, I definitely want to do this? Or how did that whole process work for you?
Coming on board with Cheika, you mean?
Yeah.
He actually asked me a couple of years ago, well, quite a few years ago, before fully hooked up with the Brumbies. He asked me to do a gig with him. I'm not sure where, somewhere overseas, and at the time I wasn't quite ready for it, and sort of knocked him back. And then he came knocking again when he sort of took over and was looking for his staff. And it was an interesting period because we were competing against one another. So he was Waratah's coach and I was Brumbies coach, and there's no bigger rivalry in Australian rugby than Brumbies versus Waratahs. There's a real hatred. I think probably every Australian franchise hates the Waratahs, but the Brumbies and the Waratahs have had a long-standing rivalry. I think because we've both been two of the more successful teams in Super Rugby. So yeah, it was kind of, and it's the same in the Test arena. You know, when I was a player, used to hate these Waratahs and Reds players, and then you'd have to come together and in the space of 2 weeks love one another because you're playing a Test match against the All Blacks. So kind of the same situation with Cheika. I mean, I'd sort of learned to hate him because he was a rival, but yeah, I think, you know, it didn't take me long to realise the calibre of the man and the fact that I wanted to be associated with him. And I've got full respect for him now. I understand how he coaches and where he's come from and what it means to him. And I think, you know, what you're saying there before in terms of embracing the scientific side of the game, we're always trying to find that little bit extra because the game at the top level is so tight. And you can probably see that with, you know, Six Nations, or if I just look at the England run, I know we're in Ireland at the moment, but if I look at the England run, you know, they had an unbelievable record of however many games in a row, but a lot of those games were won by less than 5 points. And then you flip it, and the games that they lost have been less than 5 points as well. So the game at the top level is such a tight margin that you've got to find those little 1%ers here or there. And what I've seen with Cheik since I've been on board with him is that he is constantly trying to improve himself and the team. So it's not just a stagnant, I'm happy with where I'm at. He's constantly looking for something new.
I know you said that you're not really thinking beyond this Test series at the moment, but you have been linked with being Cheika's successor. And look, it makes perfect sense that somebody from within the setup would end up taking the team forward. But for that to happen, you have to have a good World Cup. And for that to happen, you've got to get the team functioning now, 18 months out from it. So it can kind of understand exactly why you have to be very much focused in the moment. And yet at the same time, it sounds like you do want to be an international head coach at some point.
Look, I'm not ruling anything out at this stage, but I think there is a real focus, and you know, I'm sort of someone who lives in the moment. Probably saw that as a player. Nothing really fazed me on the field, and I don't plan too far ahead. My time management is probably my worst aspect, so I'm not thinking too far ahead. And genuinely, I've got to start thinking about it, obviously, about what I'm going to do afterwards, but you know, I'm trying to put everything into, for the time being anyway, particularly through this June series, trying to put everything into getting the guys prepped and ready for the game this weekend.
You mentioned there a couple of moments ago about how your opinion of Michael Cheika changed as being an opposition coach to being inside the camp with him. How do you think, just on a completely hypothetical situation here, how do you think your opinion of Eddie Jones would change from being a player under him to being on his coaching staff? Do you think that dynamic would change wholeheartedly, that you would get a completely different view of what Eddie Jones is like as a coach if you were coaching alongside him rather than just playing under him?
I know Eddie pretty well, and I know how hard he has pushed his staff over the years when he was with Australia, when he was with the Brumbies. I know how hard Eddie works himself, the hours that he keeps, and I know the standards that he wants to keep both on and off the field. So, you know, you pick that up, particularly, I think, working with Eddie as the coach and one of the senior players, you understand the guy a little bit better. And, you know, since retiring myself and since Eddie's been overseas, we've been in I wouldn't say constant communication, but we keep connected with one another, and I know the pressures that on any coach at any national level, but it doesn't get much bigger than England with the expectation of the RFU over there.
How do you view his current struggles at the moment? Because it seems kind of hard to get a read on whether or not the incredible run that you spoke about there a moment ago is the real stamp of Eddie Jones, or whether the current struggles is the real stamp of Eddie Jones. It seems like it might be somewhere in the middle.
Oh, no, I wouldn't. I certainly wouldn't read anything into the last couple of games with Eddie. I mean, everything's done for a plan with Eddie. He thinks long term. He's very good at orchestrating long term plans, and you know, you really got to take a lot of things into consideration. You don't want to have a perfect run into a World Cup. You need to have a bit of a hiccup to understand how to deal with adversity, because that's what the game's about. You're never going to have a perfect game. And I would say that you know, they've had a lot of changes as well, forced and unforced. And I wouldn't be saying anything about the form of England right now, because I know Eddie's a bit of a master planner.
That's interesting. Maybe Ireland's hiccup is going to come this weekend. Obviously, you clearly stay fairly well abreast of what's going on in this part of the world in terms of the chatter around rugby, and you know how obsessed we are about the World Cup as a nation, and it's our holy grail to get beyond the quarterfinals. Maybe we should start talking about trying to win it as opposed to get beyond the quarterfinals. But as a player, what difference did it make to you as like a 25, 26-year-old to have won the World Cup? What was the change that brought about? Or was that actually just enough in and of itself, kind of as an achievement as a player? Well, we've done that now, and that's just something to be crossed off. It doesn't make you a better, more confident individual afterwards.
No, I think it makes you more confident on the field. There's no doubt about that. I don't think off the field it makes you more confident. You know, it's always a team struggle on the field, and probably off the field. It's a team. It's combining as a team is the biggest challenge. So when you achieve something like winning a World Cup, it's never about the individual; it's about the team. So I think we were very respectful of the team that we had at the time. We were very lucky to have had the coaching staff and the run into the World Cup. So we didn't take anything for granted. I think it just probably gave me, on a personal level, a little bit more confidence when I was out on the field to be able to control things, because there is another level of pressure and expectation when you get to a World Cup.
And you know, obviously winning the final, it's not a routine victory as finals go, but it was clear that you guys were the best team in the final. In the semi-final, it wasn't quite so clear, and you do have, as you said, nothing phases you on the field of play. You do have a moment where the whole world telescopes to an opportunity for you to win the semi-final. What do you remember about that now, and do you ever lean on that experience?
No, because it wasn't something I'd planned. It was just something that happened. So, well, maybe that's it. You know, in terms of my time management, I probably just work off the cuff a little bit better than I do when I'm planning it out. It was just a special moment, but like I said, it was all of those, even those special moments that I had as an individual, wouldn't have happened without the team there. So, you know, as a player, I was non-fussed about all of that stuff, particularly any individual achievement. But the older I get, maybe the more sentimental I get, and you know, I look back on those memories certainly fondly, and proud of what we achieved.
Well, here's the thing: if the team had lost the final, no one would remember the drop goal in the semi-final. So I can totally understand why you have to plug into the team mentality. What do you remember about the drop goal itself?
Well, I've seen it a few times now on YouTube. People seem to bring it up every time I go to South Africa. But it's at the time, it was going in at full time. The assistant coach, Tim Lane, just whispered in my ear and said, if you get an opportunity to take a field goal in this extra time, don't waste it. And I guess that was in the back of my head. We you know, as a rugby nation, we never really plan for field goals. We don't plan to win games with penalty shots either, where we sort of always prided ourselves on running rugby. So there was no game plan, there was no setup for a field goal or anything like that, unlike South Africa, who clearly had them. And I remember we sort of had a hit up. I gave the ball to Gracie off the line out, he hit it up, and I was just trying to kick the ball dead, because it was all, in my head, it was, we just have to play down that end of the field. Really conservative sort of nature, let our defence do the work, put them under pressure as much as possible. And I thought I'd just kick this ball dead and we'll get 22 and we'll keep the pressure on them that way, because we were a little bit unstructured coming out of that line out, so it wasn't the perfect scenario to attack from. So that was it. In the back of my head was, I'll just kick this dead. but it didn't go dead. It went over. That's pretty lucky.
Is it true that your eyesight was really bad and you only get your eyes lasered afterwards, so you couldn't quite tell?
No, yeah, that's true. That's true. I mean, but I think that was the beauty of my game, is that, I felt a lot of things. It was a lot of peripheral vision and pick up movements as opposed to specific detail. I knew the posts were down there, down the middle of the field. I knew where the field was. I struggled to see the corner flags, and I couldn't see the touch lines because that was all a little blurry, but I knew where the posts were.
And just as a matter of interest, when you did get your eyes lasered and you could suddenly see everything, were you like, whoa, this is a bit weird?
Oh yeah, that was a British and Irish Lions series, and that was probably something that I regret. Looking back on my career, it was something that I was a little bit disappointed with, because it was exactly that. It was the week before the first test, and everything was detailed, and my depth perception was well out. So I would see guys clearly and expect that they would be, because in my old vision, they're blurry until they get to the point where I'm about to hit them, versus everything was so clear I couldn't judge that depth. So yeah, I was quite disappointed with the decision to have the surgery before that series, and then obviously the way I played through that series as well.
Yeah, I mean, how long did it take you then to get normal again, to kind of go, okay, that's fine, I understand you're this far away?
Yeah, about 4 to 6 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
and then there's obviously a benefit. There's no doubt about having better eyesight is a benefit on the field.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, listen, you've been really generous with your time. As I said, it's great to have somebody in your role speaking so openly ahead of a big test series this week. It's been a brilliant test series so far, and best of luck this weekend.
Yeah, cheers. Thank you.
Thanks a million. Stephen Larkham there, the attack coach / defensive obsessive.